31b, and we're at the Mishnah on 31b. It's at the top. It's about 10 lines on the top. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha said, the Od Zos Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Here's another takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The Gemara in this Gemara is going to count. Oh, stop doing that. I'm sorry, not you guys. Sorry, talking to my computer. Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara is going to, in this Gemara, count for us the amount of takanas we've seen in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. But either way, here's another takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, another halacha institute of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Shafilu Rosh Beis Din b'chol makom, even if the head of the Beis Din is in any place, if he travels away, if he moves, the head of he's on vacation, he's in Bermuda. Shalu yua edim holchen el l'makom avad. The edim that saw the Kiddush HaChodesh only need to go where the vad of the Beis Din is, meaning where the Beis Din would usually meet to testify. They don't have to go find the head of the Beis Din and travel to go find the head of the Beis Din. Just go to the place of the Beis Din, and that's where they would testify. The Gemara says, Hi Itza. There was a woman who was called to Beis Din in Nahar Doi. She was called to Beis Din in the city of Nahar Doi. We're on 31b, and we're the first line in the Gemara right now. So there was a woman who was called to Beis Din in Nahar Doi. Azala Meimar. So she Azal Ameimar leMachuza. Now Ameimar, who was the head of the Beis Din in Nahar Doi, he was in Machuza at the time. He had traveled to Machuza. V'lo Azla Basrei, and she didn't go and go check in with Ameimar in the city of Machuza, and rather she went to Nahar Doi. She was called to Beis Din. She went to Nahar Doi. She didn't go to Machuza, and I guess she refused to go to Machuza to go see it. Kasa Pischa Ivla. He wrote a letter of excommunication against her. Amar le Rav Ashi la Ameimar. Rav Ashi said to Ameimar, I don't know why my computer's going so nuts. Amar le Rav Ashi la Ameimar. Rav Ashi said to Ameimar at the time. Now again, Ameimar was the head of the Beis Din of Nahar Doi, and he was in Machuza at this time. This woman was called into court, and she didn't go see him. So he wrote excommunication against her. So Rav Ashi said to Ameimar, why would you do that? It says in our Mishnah clearly, I feel the Rosh Beis Din b'chol makom. Even if the Rosh Beis Din is in any place, shelo yu ha'edim holchen el l'makom avad, that the edim, when they come, they don't have to go follow and go travel to find the head of the Beis Din. Rather, they could just go where the Beis Din situates themselves, where the Beis Din usually meet. And if they go and sit with if the edim go to the courthouse, so to speak, and don't go follow the head of the Beis Din, that is okay for them to testify. Amrle, so Rav Ameimar, who had written this woman in excommunication for not going to see him, being the chief justice of that Beis Din, he wrote her into excommunication, defended his position against the seeming teaching of the Mishnah. Our Mishnah is specifically talking about Eidas HaChodesh. It's talking about when witnesses are coming to testify about the new moon. Because if we do not, if the witnesses rather have to go find where the head of the Beis Din is, the chief justice of the Beis Din, where he is, and go travel to find him to testify, then people in the future are going to say, like, I'm not going to go to the Beis Din to go testify about the new moon because he might, he might not be there. He's on a business trip, and he's always on trip. Right. Yeah. So, what? Yeah. So aval hacha, but that's specifically when it comes to Kiddush Chodesh. But here it doesn't apply. That rule doesn't apply. She needs to go check in with the chief justice in order to initiate the case or to done the case. Why? Because anytime there's a rule that's written out through, we see it in Nezikin, we'll see it much more in Nezikin, that a lova, a person who borrows money, Chazal look at him as an eved to the one that he's borrowing to, meaning the lendee has a lot of rights over the borrower in terms of that he can call him to, he can call him and say, you're coming to this basin if we have a problem. Here's the one where meeting in front of, you have to travel to my city to come get whatever it is. He can do that because at the end of the day, the lender has done a favor to the borrower, and the borrower has to, all the liens are on the borrower's stuff, so he has to do. So in this case, the woman was being called. She was being called to judgment for borrowing money, and she has to go follow whatever is protocol by the malva. Okay, by the lender. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, the Gemara is just going to something totally different. And now for something totally different, the Gemara is going to now tie up all of the takanas that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We've seen a whole bunch of takanas, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Amar Zachta. The Gemara is going to do a quick review of how many we saw, so to speak. What were they? And then just any ones that are potentially left. And then it's going to end this whole sugya. The Son of Rabbanan, Eina Kohanim. This is a famous one. It's a very interesting, one of the most interesting takanas in all of. It might be the most bizarre takana in Shas, but it's definitely up there. Tana Rabbanan, Eina Kohanim Hashem lalos b'sadleihen l'duchen. A kohen is not allowed to go up to duchen wearing his shoes. In case you didn't notice, they take their shoes off. That is a takana, that they're not allowed to wear their shoes when they duchen. It was Yom Kippur. I was a little kid. I was 18 years old, 17 years old, and like the Kohanim are going up to duchen, and it was on Yom Kippur, and it was my grandfather's shul. A lot of elderly people. They're going up to duchen, and I'm looking at the other Kohanim up there duchening, and I'm like, I'm wearing shoes. I've never seen that before, and I and they're like all getting over, and I ran over to the rabbi. I'm like, are they supposed to be wearing their shoes? He's like, no. It's like they start the duchen and they all like come down to any case. But to Kohanim are not allowed to go up wearing shoes. It's a very strange incident that occurred in Masechah Sota. But in any case, based on that, but the Kohanim can't go up wearing shoes. And this is one of the 9 takanas that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said. Now, Shista Hyperka, we had 6 takanas from Yochanan ben Zakkai in our parak. Rashi counts them. One of them was this one that we just saw in our Mishnah. One of them was one that we saw in our Mishnah that about that you don't have to the witnesses don't have to go and find the chief justice of the court. Rather, they could just go to where the court meets. Then we had that about blowing shofar outside of the after the destruction of the base of Mikdash, blowing shofar outside of the base of Mikdash where it gets blown. That a lulav is taken for all 7 days after the destruction of the base of Mikdash. I'm just reading Rashi. Rashi counts them. That the Yom Hanaf, the day that they bring the korban omer, is asar. That day, the 16th of Nisan, is prohibited in eating the new grain for the entire day. That we accepted after the destruction of the base of Mikdash, we accepted witnesses about the new moon the entire day, and then this one which we just saw, which is about them going up to duchen not wearing shoes. Those are the 6 that we saw in our parak. 6 different takanas, 6 different institutions that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made. He made in our Mishnah. Hold on 1 second. And the Gemara says, and there was one more that we saw in the first parak, which is that Edom that are testifying about the moon will not be allowed to violate Shabbos except for the months of Nisan and Tishrei. Now v'idach, and now there's another one that it's Gershon is Gair Bizman Hazeh. If someone converts today, meaning nowadays. Not today particularly, but nowadays, they have to separate. This the halacha says. He did not say this. Halacha is what the Mishnah says. They have to separate a certain amount of money, a quarter amount of money, whatever it is, in order to have the money for the korban to be brought. If the base of Mikdash gets built, they need to bring a korban, also a bird. They need to bring it to complete that conversion process. So that is what the halach is. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he did away with that halach. He said, don't separate any money for korbanos. Bad idea. Don't separate any money for korbanos because you're going to be sitting with that money in your drawer and saying, okay, when the Beis Hamikdash gets built, I got that money that I'm going to go bring my korban. And people are going to be sitting with that money in their drawer for a long time until one day they're like, what's this money doing here? Which, I don't know if it's ever happened to you with whatever. It's happened to me. Like, I have money folded up in my wallet that somebody gave me because I went on a trip to Israel. So I'm looking at this money and it's folded. I'm like, it's kind of folded like a money had folded up, but like, I'm not sure. Maybe it's my money, huh?
20 years later.
Yeah, right. And I'm looking at it. So as a matter of fact, one time, I never did this again. But in any case, either way, so he didn't want. So you're going to spend it on a candy bar, and it's gonna. So he did away with that halacha. One time, I actually did make money hekdesh. I made money, not it was sort of hekdesh. It was truma money. I took something that I bought produce, and generally speaking, if you go into a shop in Israel that is under a good hechsher, that's under a good supervision, so the trumas and the maises have been taken off already. That's been taken care of. But it was a lot cheaper, and to go to one that doesn't have that and take them off yourself. I have no idea how to do it. I had no idea how to do it. And I still have only tried to do it once. And it was such a disaster that I never wanted to do it again. I took the money, I put it on a coin, that money had to go on another coin, then I took it. And then I wound up, I'm like sitting and then I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this coin? So I asked someone who I didn't know what they were talking about. And they told me, oh, destroy the coin. So I tried to destroy the coin. I'm putting it in I remember it was in my in-laws' house. I wound up dropping the coin. The coin falls. It rolls down into something else. It rolled into their radiator, fell down the thing. I'm sitting there trying to get the coin. I never found the coin. In any case, because of these kinds of instances that your money might get spivaked. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai decided that let's do it with that. The idach. Now there is another one plucked up. There is one that is a debate between the Rav Papa and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. There is one more that's a debate if Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana, and that's a debate between Rav Papa and Rav Nachman. These have nothing to do with Maseches Rosh Hashanah. The only tie-in again is that we're discussing Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He potentially was involved in this takana. What are the two opinions? Rav Papa Mar Ravai. Rav Papa said that the last takana that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was involved in had to do with Kerem Ravai, fourth year produce. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Lashon Shezahoris. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said it has to do with the red thread that was tied onto the goat that was sent to Azazel. We would tie a red thread on that goat, if you remember, and that we would hope would turn white. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we'll talk a little more in a minute. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was involved in takana having to do with that red thread. So let's see what the two opinions are. Rav Papa Amar Kerem Ravai. Rav Papa said that the takana that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, his last takana, had to do with Kerem Ravai, fourth year produce. The Tanya Kerem Ravai, Ola Yerushalayim. Kerem Ravai has to be brought to Yerushalayim. Mahalach Yom l'chol tzad. And 1 day in every direction of Yerushalayim. So the halacha is like this: first three years of fruit from a tree, it's orla, it's aser. You're not allowed to have that. You can't use those produce whatsoever. The fourth year produce has to be brought to Yerushalayim to be eaten. The halacha is that you are allowed to be poda that, like I tried to do that time. You got to put it on money and take that money to Yerushalayim and spend the money in Yerushalayim. That is halacha. However, there's a takana that was made potentially in Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's name that if you lived 1 day journey outside of Yerushalayim, that you don't put it on money. You should not be put it, but we want you to actually schlep your produce into Yerushalayim. You're only 1 day away. Get your produce in here. Why? Because they did want to bring a lot of produce into Yerushalayim. It was incredibly good for the economy because you would a lot of people are coming to Yerushalayim at these times. What was going on was usually if people are bringing their money to be spent in Yerushalayim, it means they're going to Yerushalayim anyway. Realize that not everybody, there wasn't a bullet train that was going to Yerushalayim. It's actually somebody told me this week you can take a train. It's so far for me. I mean, I feel like I'm such an old geezer now, but like, oh yeah, I got to Tel Aviv and I go shopping in Tel Aviv and I come back, all the time. I'm like, it's 21 minutes back and forth, back the 21-minute train and 21 minutes the other way. And it's like very comfortable. And they just, if I want to go shopping, I do. Like I would go to, I think I went to Tel Aviv. I lived in Israel for 6 years. I think I went to Tel Aviv like twice because the trip, but the traffic, and I was like, schlep. It's crazy. 21 minutes. It took me 21 minutes to get off my block in Brooklyn in the morning. So in any case, so you had in 1 day journey, it was very, very advantageous. All these people would be coming when they were coming anyway for their karbanos. They would be coming to Yerushalayim. They wouldn't just pop to Yerushalayim all the time. So they would be coming at the Regel, whatever it was. They would be coming anyway. So it was very advantageous and beautiful for Yerushalayim to have all these produce brought there, and there would be a lot of things for people to buy. And it was just the shuks were full. So they wanted everyone to bring their produce if they lived close enough. So what? And then the Gemara continues. So that 1 day journey from Yerushalayim, and this Durabanan again. Duraisa, you can put it onto money and take the money. Durabanan, they said, bring your produce. That would be if you're 1 day journey away from Yerushalayim on any side. And what was that? And what are those boundaries? Elas min Tzafon, in the north it was Elas. The Arkabas min Adaram, place called Arkabas in the south. Lud min Amarav, in the west it was Lud. The Yarden min Mizrach, and the Yarden, the river itself, the Yarden was on the right, it was on the east. So that is the boundaries. V'amar Ula, v'itema Rabba bar Ula. Ula said, and some say is Rabba bar Ula. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, matam. What was the reason why this was set up? That you should bring your peiros, you should bring your fruit. If you're a 1 day journey away from Yerushalayim, to bring you actually schlep your fruit into Yerushalayim. In order that Yerushalayim be adorned with fruit. Vitanya, and we have a brisa. So the brisa says, Rabbi Eliezer b'mizrach Lud, b'tzad kfar Tevi. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, one of the most prominent of the Talmid Chachamim of the Tanaim. He was the teacher of many of Rabbi Akiva, amongst others. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus lived in the east in Lud, in a place called Kfar Tvi. Ubikesh Rabbi Eliezer lafkiru lanian, and Rabbi Eliezer wanted he could not bring his peiros to Yerushalayim. He wasn't able to. Now it's possible that he wasn't allowed to. It's possible he wasn't around. Maybe he just wasn't able to at that time. It's possible he wasn't even allowed to. He spent a second part of his life in excommunication because of that famous story that happened with he fought with all the chachamim on about halacha, having to do with the oven, and he brought all these miraculous things. In any case, but either way, so he wanted to be. He might have been after. Either way, he wanted to what he wanted to do is he wanted to relinquish ownership of all of these fruit to Aniyim, to let the Aniyim have it. He didn't want to bring it, so he said, I'll relinquish it to the Aniyim and let them have it. Amrulo Tamidov. So his student said to him, Rabbi, you don't have to do that. Kvar nimnu chavracha alav v'tiru. Your friends had already sorry, just how do I get rid of this chat window? There we go. Your friends had already overturned this takana, so you don't have to worry about it. The takana is no longer extant. So Gemara says man chaverecha. So this is the opinion of we're in Rav Papa, right? This is the opinion of Rav Papa. Man chaverecha. Who is the chaverim of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had overturned this takana. Again, the takana would have been originally. And the original halacha would have been that if you lived 1 day's journey outside of Yerushalayim, you should bring your fruits to Yerushalayim, not put it onto, not exchange it with money and bring money to Yerushalayim, but bring the actual fruits to Yerushalayim in order to adorn the shuks, the marketplace of Yerushalayim with fruit, so you could sell it in Yerushalayim or do whatever, or eat it in Yerushalayim. So, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he stopped that halacha, and we see in the story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus. Now the Gemara said that was one opinion that this was one of the halachas that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was involved in. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak has another opinion, and the Gemara, after quoting Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's opinion, is going to ask why Rav Papa didn't agree with Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's opinion, and why Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak didn't agree with Rav Papa's opinion. Again, what they're arguing about is there was one more halacha that we know. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he stopped. There was a halacha that he made a takana with his beis din. He made a institution with his beis din to stop a halacha. Rabbi Papa's opinion had to do with the fruits. Rav Nachman's opinion has to do with Amar Lasha Shal Zaharis. It had to do with this red thread on Yom Kippur. Tanya, as the Brisa says, we'll continue. Originally, the original halacha was they took this red thread and they tied it on the front of the ulam, the front of the entryway of the heichal, out on the front of the entryway of the heichal on Yom Kippur. So again, what they used to do is the Sarla Azazel, the goat that was sent into the wilderness to the place called Azazel on Yom Kippur. It was one of the main avodas, one of the main what's the word I'm looking for? Not offerings, but one of the main services. Thank you. On Yom Kippur, that's Sarla Azazel. What they would do is there was one part of the red thread that was tied to the Sarla Azazel. One part was tied onto the ulam, onto the entryway of the heichal. Now the heichal is just you have the azara, which really only kohanim are allowed to be in. You have the azara, which is the courtyard, and then you have inside there is you have the mizbeach, the big mizbeach is inside there, and then you have that T-like building, which is the heichal. On the entryway of that T-like building, that T-like building, T-shaped building, they would tie the lashon shel zehuris. They would tie this red thread. When the goat was pushed off into the wilderness, pushed off the cliff, if the Jewish people were notorious in their service, so it says it was miraculous that red thread would turn white on the heichal. So Gemara, so they usually used to tie it over there. Gemara continues. Hilbin, if it would turn white, hayusmeichen. Everybody was ecstatic. The Kohanim would see it turn white, and they were ecstatic. They would come out with all these huge smiles. They were ecstatic that they knew that the Jewish people were forgiven for their sins. Lo hilbin, but if it didn't, he would stop him. They would come out super depressed. Like that's after everything, the thread is still red, so indicating that Hashem had not really fully accepted their tshuva. So this kept on happening. So Rabbi Yochanan, so there was a takana that they would no longer, because they didn't want everyone coming out depressed and feeling deflated. So they would take the red thread and tie it instead of on the front of the heichal. They would tie it inside the heichal, so no one could see it except very, very few. No one could see it. But the Kohanim still used to try to peek in. They would peek through the door. They would see it. They would still be able to see it. It's interesting. They didn't want to just block it. They have to move it, but they didn't do that. Instead, what did they do? And what happened? They would see the hilbin lo hayusmeichen, and still, if it turned white, they were happy. Lo hilbin lo hayu. And if it didn't turn white, they were depressed. So hiskinu. So the atakana they made a takana. They no longer tied that red thread in the base of Mikdash at all. What they would do is they would tie half of it on the rock next to where on the cliff. So the Kohen who was going to push the animal off that cliff would rip the thread. He would tie half of it on the rock and by the entrance of the cliff, by the cliff of the cliff, the ledge of the cliff. Thank you. And v'chetz of al karnov, and half of it was on shelsera mishtaleach, and half of it was on the horns of the animal that was getting thrown off. And he would be the only one to see it. Basically, it was only him. So they wouldn't all leave the rest of Yom Kippur depressed. Okay, so now we have two different opinions of what this last takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was. One of them having to do with the fruits, one of them having to do with this red thread. The Gemara asks, Rav Nachman Yitzchak, my time below Mark Rav Papa. Rav Nachman Yitzchak, who said it has to do with this red thread. Why didn't he say it was the takana of the fruits? How does he know that it wasn't that one? Amalacha, he says he would tell you the following: Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if you would think that brisa, which is mentioning that the takana, that there was originally a halacha that there was originally a halacha that you had to bring any fruits that were within 1 day journey of Yerushalayim into Yerushalayim and not redeem it onto money, but actually take the actual fruits and schlep it into Yerushalayim. That was the original halacha. And then came a Beis Din and said, you no longer have to do that. If you were to think that the Beis Din that stopped that practice was the Beis Din of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, chaver of Rabbi Eliezer mihava. The Mishnah that you quoted to bring as a proof says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Harkanas lived in one of those cities, and he was going to relinquish ownership of the fruit rather than having to schlep all of the fruit to Yerushalayim. He was going to relinquish ownership of the fruit to poor people, so he wouldn't have to schlep it. And his Talmidim said, your friends already stopped that practice. The Beis Din, your friends have already stopped that practice. Rabbi Yochanan, if it would be Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that was the one that stopped that practice, they wouldn't call him Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus' friends because he was the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was his teacher. So the wording of the Brisa seems to indicate it was a different Beis Din. It was a Beis Din that was his peers, not his mentors, not his teachers. Chaver Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mihava Rabo Hava. He was the teacher of not Rabbi Eliezer. Sorry, Chaver Rabbi Eliezer mihava Rabo Hava. He was his teacher. What is it does the Brisa indicates it wasn't his teacher, it was his friends. So Rav Papa would defend this by saying V'idach keved the tamidim havo. He would answer you and say, you're right, it really was his teacher. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. However, keved the tamidim havo, since it was the students of Rabbi Eliezer talking to Rabbi Eliezer, lavar achar le'memer le'Rebbe Rabcha. It's not respectful to say your teacher was the one that instituted, not that way. Why are you doing this? Rather to say, didn't you know? They said, didn't your colleagues already? So they were speaking respectfully to their teacher, and not saying, well, your teacher. It wasn't. They wouldn't be respectful. Okay. So that's the answer to that. Rav Papa, my time below Mark Rav Nachman. Now Rav Papa. He said the takana had to do with the fruits. Why didn't Rav Papa, why was he not of the opinion like Rav Nachman that the takana had to do with the red thread? So I'm going to tell you like this. Now he's just going to give you a little bit of historical context. When did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai live, and when was the Beis Hamikdash destroyed? And do those years work out? That it was possible that he was the one that was involved in the takana of not putting the red thread on the Beis Hamikdash. If you want to tell me that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was of the Beis Din that stopped the practice of having the red thread on the entrance of the Heichal, were they? Is it even possible that they were putting red thread on the Beis Hamikdash in his time? That he was the one that possibly stopped it. Vatanya. Let's see a brisa. Kol shana Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai meya v'eshem shana. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived 120 years. It's fascinating. Meya shana asak b'pragmatia. Not meya shana. Arba b'shana asak b'pragmatia. 40 years he was involved in business. Does that sound familiar? 40 years. You know how many these are? I could. 40 years. 40 years he was involved in business. 40 years he learned. Arbim Shana Limaid, and 40 years he became the teacher of all the other Rebbeim. 40. You have the same Rabbi Akiva, right? He's 40. You have Moshe Rabbeinu at his 40. You have. I mean, there's no way that is a coincidence. That's all I can say. There's no way that's good. As a matter of fact, it says about a person by the name of Rabbi Yochanan Kohen Gadol. For 40 years he was the Kohen Gadol, and then 40 years he went off, and then for 40 more years he went back to being. So you have the same. Wow, they all nailed it at 40, and his name was Yochanan too. So you should know that all of the commentaries that whose interests are in the deeper areas of Agadata, mainly in the kivun, in the teaching, so to speak, in the schools of like the Maharal of Prague and things like that. All of those, they jump on these numbers and jump on, especially 40. 40 is a gigantic number. So it says. So you see, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, only the last 40 years of his life was he the teacher of. Would have he had been on the Beis Din? I mean, before that, first he was involved in. Whatever in business. Then 40 years after. Then for 40 years he was learning. And then 40 years he became the teacher. So it could only be the last 40 years. And that's keep doing the math of in historical, timeline of here. But Tanya, we have another brayta. 40 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, that red thread never turned white for those 40 years. Ela ma'adim, rather it got a deeper red. It actually got redder, meaning indicating you guys are in big trouble. So okay, so we know for 40 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it never turned white. Vitnan, and we have a mission. Mishacharva bias, Hiskin Yochanan ben Zakkai. there's another a Mishnah that says when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana. So if you do all the math, what comes out is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So that means he was in charge of the Beis Din at the time of the destruction. As a matter of fact, he was in charge of the Beis Din at the time of the destruction. That's clear, right? 40 years before that, it already wasn't turning white, right? But for 40 years, if you count 40 years back, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was no longer in charge of the Beis Din. He was a student. So how is it possible to say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's they made this takana 40 years before it wasn't turning white for 40 years before? How is it possible that he was a student at the time? He was not even involved in the Beis Din. Hold on a second. I don't know why that's such a strong question. It's such an easy answer. So I see that's why Rashi says the question, but this is an easy answer. I don't know why. Okay. I'm not sure why the Gemara just doesn't answer. Okay, so you made it, yeah. So that doesn't. Why is that a strong question? All right, I'm going to leave it. I don't know. Either way, that is the way the question is. Meaning, if you do the math again, for 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the string was not turning. The string was already not turning white, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at that point was not. He was. You're predating his head of this being the head of the Sanhedrin. He wasn't even on the Sanhedrin at the time. He was a student. So it can't be that he was the one that made that takana. That's the way it sets up the timeline. Okay. So the Gemara says, so that is the question. And the reason why Rav Papa said his last takana had nothing to do with the red thread. He couldn't have been involved in that takana, rather it had to do with the fruits. So, what's the defense for the one that says it did have to do with the red thread? Bidach osam arba'im shana delamad Talmud Yoshev Rabo Haba. Those 40 years, which he was learning, he was a student in front of his rabbi. V'amar milsa v'stavra time, and he said he was the one that suggested the idea to the Sanhedrin, to his rabbi. V'kavei rabbi b'shmei, and his rabbi, you're right, he wasn't the head of the Sanhedrin, but his rabbi brought that point up to the Sanhedrin, and they voted on that point, and they set it up in Rabbi Chanan ben Zakkai's name, even though you're right, he wasn't leading the Sanhedrin at that time. So it could be that he was the one that said it. In either case, we're left off with the machlokas. What was his last takana? Does it have to do with the fruits, or does it have to do with this red thread? And that's unresolved. But both takanas were true. Just a question of which one he was involved in. Says the next Mishnah. Now we're going into really the day of Rosh Hashanah. Seder brachos. What is the Seder of the brachas that we say in Shemona Esrei on Rosh Hashanah? Seder brachas, Omer Avos Gvurus Kedusha Shem. We say the first three brachas, which are static brachas. Those brachas are every day of the year. There is not a single Shemona Esrei of the entire year that those three brachas are not said. First, we start with Magen Avraham. The second bracha is Mechayim Esim, and the third bracha is Hakel HaKadosh. Although on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur we say Hamelech HaKadosh, but either way, it's called Kedusha Hashem. So those three brachas are said. Kollel Malchios Imahim, and so according to this Tanakh, we're going to say we take Malchios, which is the verses and the prayer that have to do with Hashem's kingship, and we put it inside that Kedusha Hashem. Ve'ena Toke'ah. And by Malchias, there's no, this is not the way we do it. Well, I was about to say the way we do it, but this is not the way we do it. So what we need to know is like this. Let's just give a little bit of a preface. Every Shemona Esrei of the entire year has three brachas at the beginning and three brachas at the end. There is no Shemona Esrei that differs. The first three brachas, Avos, Gvurus, Kedusha Hashem, right? Like we just said. The last three brachas, Ritzei, Modim, and Sim Shalom. Those brachas, there is not a single Shemona Esrei, Shachas or Musaf, that does not do that, does not follow that. During the entire year, we have in the middle, originally it was 12, it's 13, 19, it's a total of 19 brachas, even though it's called Shemona Esrei 18, but we have 13 brachas in the middle. Besides those three at the beginning and those three at the end, which we're going to keep static the entire time, we have 13 in the middle. On Shabbos, we have one in the middle, right? So Shabbos, Shachas, and Musaf, and Mincha, we have one in the middle. On Rosh Hashanah, we have three in the middle. making a total of 9. So you always have this 3 beginning, 3 at the end. During the weekday, there's 13 in the middle. Shabbos is 1 in the middle. Rosh Hashanah is unique. It has 3 in the middle. Those 3 brachas are Malchias, Shofros, Malchias, Zichronos, and Shofros. Hashem's kingship, remembrance, and the shofar. The question is the problem that they're faced is, if you are doing a musaf, by definition of every musaf, you have to be talking about the musaf of the day. Every musaf Shmona Esrei, musaf is really corresponding to the korban musaf that was brought that day, right? That's it. All Shmona Esreis somehow correspond somewhat to the Beis Hamikdash. Musaf is specific. The reason why you have an extra Shmona Esrei on every Yontif or Shabbos is because on Yontifs and Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, we had an extra musaf. By the way, parenthetically, that's why on Chanukah and Purim, there's no musaf on Chanukah and Purim, because they didn't bring any extra karbonos on Chanukah and Purim. Those were Durabanan. There was no extra karbonos that were brought. So we don't have a musaf. But Rosh Chodesh, an extra carbon was brought. So even though we say a full Hallel on Chanukah, and we don't say a full Hallel on Rosh Hashanah, seeming to indicating that it was a happier day on Chanukah, but not Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Chodesh rather. But Rosh Chodesh, there was a musaf brought, so we say a korban, we say a musaf Shmona Esrei. So therefore, every Yontif needs to have, every Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, whatever Yontif, there needs to be because a musaf, a korban musaf, an offering in the Beis Hamikdash was brought as a musaf in the Beis Hamikdash. So we have to say a musaf Shmona Esrei. Fine. So if you're going to add Malchias, Hashem's kingship, Zichronos, remembrance, and Shofros into the Shmona Esrei, those are going to be our 3 middle brachas. Where is your korban musaf? Where are you going to put that? Where are you going to talk about the holiness of the day and the korban musaf? You have to put that somewhere, and you're only allowing 3 slots. So it's got to go into one of those 9 slots. You're going to have to add the holiness of the day into one of those 9 slots. So now, what it does is the following. So he says, the Tanakama says, let's start with the Mishnah one more time. Say the brachas, Omer Avos Gvurus L'Kedushas Hashem. The brachas are the regular 3 brachas, first static brachas, Avos Gvuros and B'chaim Esim and Kedushas Hashem and Hakel Kadash. The Kol Malchios Imayim. He says, you know what we do? Take the Malchios, the kingship bracha, and add it into the first 3 brachas. Be'ena Tokeya. And there's no sounding of the shofar by there. Kedushas Hashem. Then instead of having one of the 3 brachas being Malchios, we're gonna kind of shtup Malchios into one of the first 3 brachas. But Kedushas Hayom, rather, saying the holiness of the day is going to be the first of the middle brachas, and Tokeya, and we blow the shofar. Zichronos, then we talk about the remembrance brachas, v'Tokeya, and we blow the shofar. Shofros, v'Tokeya, we do the shofar brachas, and we blow the shofar. V'Omer, and then continue Shmona Esrei as usual. Avoda, Hoda, Birchos Kohanim. You do the Avoda, Ritzei, Hoda, Modim, Birchos Kohanim. Divrei Rabbi Chanan ben Nuri. That was Rabbi Chanan ben Nuri's opinion. We do not do it this way. This is not the way we do it. I'm going to see. Amar Rabbi Akiva. What are you talking about? He says you can't do that. If you're not going to blow shofar by Malchias, so why are you even saying Malchias? Ella, rather, and he's going to say it the way that we do it. Omer Avos Gvurus Kedushas Hashem. You say the first 3 brachas normally. Again, our third bracha happens to have a bunch of additions in the way we do the third bracha contemporarily, but in any case, but either way, that we say that, but the first 3 brachas keep to those 3 topics. That's it. The Kollel Malchios im Kedushas Hayom v'Tokeya. You take that bracha, the musaf, the topic that deals with the day, with the korban musaf and the holiness of the day, and we're going to fuse that with Malchias. This is exactly what we do. When you do the musaf on Rosh Hashanah, you go after you say Hamelach HaKadosh, which is the end of the first 3 brachas, you start to talk about the holiness of the day, and then you move into Malchias. It's a fused bracha. It's infused. Both of them are together. V'Tokeya. And when we do blow shofar by Malchias, and then you do Zichronos, V'Tokeya, Shofros, V'Tokeya, V'Omer Avoda V'Avoda Berachos Kohanim. And then we continue on Shmona Esrei with Ritzei, Modim, and Berachos Kohanim. That Rabbi Akiva's opinion is the one that follows much more like ours. Gemara says, Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said back to Rabbi Chanan ben Nuri in our Mishnah, if you're not going to blow shofar by Malchus, why are you mentioning Malchus in the first place? The Gemara asks, Lamu Maskir. What do you mean? Why do you do it? Rachman Amar Idgar. We have the Torah says to mention Malchus. Hashem says to mention Malchus. Meaning there was already a tradition that was something that has to be done on Rosh Hashanah. So it says, Ela lama asar lema tesha. Why do you say 10 verses for Malchias? You could say less. You could say 9. Or so the whole Vishtani. Because if the bracha is different than the other 3, then it's different. You can deviate in the way it's done. Now, what you're going to need to know is we're going to see later, every one of the special brachas, those 3 brachas, those middle brachas that we say in Rosh Hashanah, each of them are going to contain 10 verses. The Torah is going to say that you need to do a pattern of 10 verses. So we're going to see more about that later. But Rabbi Akiva's question on Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is the following: if Malchias is going to get fused into the first 3 brachas, it's not a special part of the day. You're saying just put it with the first 3, the static brachas. It's okay. So why does Malchias need its own 10 verses? There's nothing special about it. Just it's different than the other. Let him do 9 verses. Let him do 8 verses. What's the difference? So that's his question. Now the Gemara is going to quote a brisa. It's going to go on for a bit. Tana Rabbanan, we have a brisa. Minayin she'omrim avos. How do you know in general that when you say Shmona Esrei, you have to start with avos? Why do you have to say, why is avos the beginning of Shmona Esrei? So the pasuk the Gemara brings a pasuk, brisa brings a pasuk. Havul Hashem b'nei elim. Let the children the children of the mighty one give praise to Hashem. So we see from there that the children of the avos should praise Hashem. How do you know that you have to mention Hashem's gvura? Because the verse says, "Shenamar havul Hashem kavod va'oz." Talk about Hashem's his might. How do you know that you should do Kedushas Hashem? Mention the Kedusha of the Kedusha of Hashem. Shenamar, the pasuk says, Hovul Hashem kvod shemo hishtachvel Hashem b'hadras kodesh. It says, give praise to Hashem's name and bless him amongst the kodesh, amongst the holy. Fine. So that's how we know those 3. Uminayin. Now we're moving on to the next 3. Uminayin she'omer malchias zichronos v'shofros. If you want to know the weekday Shemona Esrei, that's in Brachas, but now we're going to Rosh Hashanah Shemona Esrei. Minayit Shomim Malchias Zichronos V'Shofros. How do you know that you have to say those 3 topics? Malchias, Hashem's kingship, Zichronos, remembrance, Shofros, the talk about Shofar. How do you know that we have to do that on Rosh Hashanah? Rabbi Elazar Omer Dichsiv, because the pasuk says Shabbason Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh. The pasuk says the words Shabbason Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh in Vayikra. It says those words, that it's a Yom Shabbason, it's a day of rest, and Zichron Trua, a remembrance of the Trua Mikra Kodesh that is declared holy. Shabbason, the word Shabbason, Zu Kedushas Hayom. That is the Kedusha of the day. Zichron, the remembrance, Elu Zichronos. That is referring to Hashem's remembrance. Trua, Ela Shofros. That's referring to the shofar. Mikra Kodesh, to call a Kodesh, Kacheu Ba'asiyas Malacha. Kacheu, you should make it holy by I guess refraining from malacha, by refraining from doing any malacha. I don't see a Rashi on this, but yeah. So hold on a second. Yeah. Okay. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said back to him, "Mipnei malo nomar Shaba Shabbason shabo pasach hakasav tchila." Why don't you learn that from? It says it's a Shabbat Shabbason, which the pasuk started from. There you can already learn that you have to refrain from malacha. Ela Shabbason kacheu b'asiyas malacha. From the word Shabbason, you know that you have to be makadosh the day by keeping with malacha. Zichron, Ela Zichronos, Trua, Ela Shofros, Mikra Kodesh, Zu Kedushas Hayom. From the words Mikra Kodesh, we see Kedushas Hayom, that you have to declare the day holy. Umenayin she'omer Malchias. And how do we know that you need to say Malchias? Tanya, we have a brisa, Rebbe Omer, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. It says, I am Hashem, your God. U'b'chodesh Shvi Zu Malchus. And it's